I can tell you, although I spend an immense amount of my time looking at Russia and looking at China and the relationships between those powers, what the leaders are aiming at and what the US is aiming at. And I come to a negative, very negative view of the world. But most of my clients, I come back to this point, believe this is background music in a bull market. That's a fact. In other words, I think the geopoliticals, I think the economics are all not pointing in the right direction. But the majority of the investors with whom I deal consider that many of those factors, which worry you and worry me, are background noise to a bull market.
All right, well, we'll talk about the specific reaction of the investors and your clients in a second. But just, if I may, just indulge this very esoteric and big picture theme for just a moment. The common prosperity idea that China is now pursuing, give me your thoughts on that. And where does that fit into what seems to be a broader conversation in the West, too, about the nature of capitalism, about the nature of stakeholder interests and corporate behavior?
Well, I think it's a very key point, and you can see it from two ways. First of all, if you're a narrowly focused equity investor, you can simply say this is a transfer of national income from corporate accounts to the state accounts and then to the emerging middle classes. And therefore, the stakeholder, in terms of the equity investor, will have a smaller pie to be fed dividends or future returns from. But if you actually look at what is happening in China and in the world, this is in many ways a legitimate attempt to rein in the power of the Chinese equivalent of, say, Facebook and Google and so on, the mega dominant global players, except within a China concept, so you're talking about Tencent and Alibaba and so on. Now, what it marks in history is the end of the period of robber barons, which, as you know, was the case in the US, which came to terms with it partly as a result of the Second World War. But it was only at that point that they got rid of the Wild West capitalism of robber barons. And in a sense, that is exactly what China is doing. But of course, people don't invest on that basis. And for them, the holders in particular of certain forms of debt, which is kind of unsustainable debt in property developers, etc., and for holders of corporations where gigantic mega personalities drove the returns, those sort of investments are not going to work. What will work will be the people who build hospitals and schools.